Hello everybody, Darren Cross here, MBA 652, Organizational Behavior. We are in Mod 6 and this is the intro/lecture video for Mod 6. In Module 6, we're talking about chapters 11, 12, and kind of 13. I'll tell you about that here in a second. So, chapters 11, 12, and 13 are building on the stuff that we've already been talking about. These are some ancillary things that might contribute to the situational factors that could influence employee behavior inside of organizations. And so, chapter 11 is about conflict. One thing that's inevitable is that when you have two or more people, you have two or more points of view, and rarely, in fact, never do you have two people who agree on absolutely everything. And so there comes a point at which they're going to be communicating back and forth, and there's some ideas that clash. And so in those ideas, the clashing of those ideas is really conflict. And I think that our philosophy is that we want to try to avoid conflict if we can, or some people try to respond to conflict with aggression or something like that. But I think before we even think about what this really means, we have to think first about what conflict can mean for you. So the book points out the fact that not all conflict is bad conflict, right? Conflict is, it can be good and productive, or it can be bad and pretty malproductive. But you can be productive when you put it on the right plane first. And so the book talks about the difference between task conflict and relational or relationship conflict, right? So the idea here really is that if there is a conflict on the task itself, that's probably a healthy conflict, because now you have, a diversity of thought and a diversity of innovation about the same task. So that leads to bigger and better ideas, creativity. If the conflict, however, has to do with relationship, then that's a whole different beast, and it really has no place in the organization. I hate this person because they made me mad before, or, this person is dating my ex-boyfriend, or this person doesn't like the Cardinals or doesn't like the Cubs. That's silliness. So the chapter really talks about how to keep this focused on the task itself. And so inside of the conflict chapter, we talk about the difference between good and bad conflict. We talk about how people handle conflict and how productive those ways can be, and some productive ways for actually handling conflict. So go in, dig into those, and watch the ancillary videos that relate to that as well. Chapter 12 is about leadership in organizations. And so if what we're concerned about is understanding the behavior of employees inside of organizations, and we know that there's the Mars model, which states that the MAR inside of the employee influences employee behavior, and then there are some situational factors outside of the employee that influence behavior. The biggest outside factor, one could argue, is leadership, how people interact with the people who are in charge of organizations. And so that's why we have to be concerned about leadership. What is leadership? How do we get the best out of leadership? How do we, what are some theories that relate to leadership? The chapter talks about all of those things, and it talks about whether or not, leadership is really something that you're born with or something you can develop. I argue it's both. You have some traits, and then there's also some skills that you can learn along the way. And then the book talks about several leadership theories. So dig into that, and I have some ancillary videos that relate to that as well. Now, the other thing, chapter 13, designing organizational structures. I did not put the PowerPoint in this chapter, and I don't really even want you to dig into the chapter, because I think it takes a distracting view of what really is necessary. The idea behind designing organizational structures is really this. How do we put people together and align things so that we have the proper flow of resources, information, and communication so that we get the best out of what we need? How do we divide things? How do we organize things? Who's in charge of whom, and all of that kind of stuff? I think that the video I have, the ancillary video that relates to designing organizational structures, is probably the best conceptualization of it. And so take a look at that video. It's not really going to come into play except to understand that the way you structure an organization influences all of these other things that we're talking about, right? How close are we to the leaders of the organization? How are we actually, how close are we to interacting with our managers? Are we structured in such a way that there's an increased propensity for or an increased potential for conflict, because it's us versus them based on the nature of how you have things organized. And so if you can just think past a couple of steps, you can understand how designing organizations could be important. So that's really all we care about with that. Dig into those videos, dig into the discussion board, and I think you guys will be in good shape for this week. Good luck, everybody.